geballte Aufmerksamkeit offensichtlich. Oder,
sagen Sie noch was? Oder?
Bitte.
Ja?
Ich glaube, wir legen los.
Yeah, everybody, very happy that you're here, that we can host today the lecture of Professor Jahrmann and Professor Glasauer and Sabine Adler and the CEO of the ERES Foundation. And we are a foundation that fosters a dialogue between science and arts, and we do a lot of exhibitions on the interface of science and art. And we are very happy that we can host this event tonight. And as you can see, our lectures always take place in exhibition space, and therefore we have some special, you have to be very careful because the artwork is very expensive and so on. But we think that it's a very nice environment to learn about inner outer space in art and psychophysics. So I really warmly welcome you and happy to both of you that you are here tonight, and of course the audience, because it's very good outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and we also want to thank first of all the ERES Foundation, and then of course the Center for Advanced Studies of the LMU for hosting Margarete Jahrmann, and you all of course, because it's really a decision on such a day to come to a talk in the evening, right? So you're very brave of you, and I hope you will have some interesting stuff here.
Vielleicht sage ich gleich, wenn du auf den nächsten Screen gehst, da ist nämlich auf Deutsch etwas.
Ich versuche gerade. Aus irgendeinem Grund reagiert es nicht. Ah ja, ich weiß, weil wir hier... Okay.
I was switching to German because I also wanted to say thank you again to Frau Dr. Adler. Es war ein Unterfangen, das etwas ungewiss war. Was sind ludische Erkenntnisgegenstände, spielerische Erkenntnisgegenstände? Ludic Epistemes was our original English title, and it was not really clear how can we communicate that also here in the context of a gallery space, although it's a focus on art science, but also it's not clear and not very common ground in relation to sciences, to humanities. What is artistic research if we focus also on the artifacts, on art objects, and play with these and come then to an insight? And the German term Erkenntnis is not a bad choice that we also have it here now as a German title, because diese Erkenntnis is something where we also have a recognition, if we translate it literally, not only insight, it's perception, recognition, and knowing something by getting an insight through the Erkennen, the momentum of Erkenntnis, through the momentum of a cognitive and also intuitive process, most probably. But where do we land now?
Yeah, and I think this is also what kind of the fact of that we want some Erkenntnis, some kind of insight and knowledge. This is also something which kind of connects us, art and science. So this is one of the points which I think. So we start with the lunar lander, of course, because of this occasion here. Yeah. So we see the Armstrong guy standing there, waiting for the lunar lander, probably. And here we have Margarete Jahrmann in the lunar lander, and it turns out that this is, of course, not a lunar lander. What is it? It is a device for transforming bodily waste into energy. It's called P-Power, and it's manufactured by the Bristol Energy Center, and it basically serves as a mobile toilet.
And it was exhibited at the Museum of Applied Arts Vienna. It is still there exhibited, and it's an exhibition about sustainable forms of energy, of getting, dealing with the resources that our planet has. And this has to do, it's not a coincidence that the lunar lander is a power plant, let's say, mining the human body, and it looks like the lunar lander because it's about mining space, outer space, like an escape idea, but the real in space also gives ground to a sustainable solution. So I think that was our lunar lander to enter the discourse about inner and outer space. So let's start with an experiment also.
In the first NASA report on the possibility of mining rare earths and new elements on Mars from 1959, there is a chapter on greenhouses in which the bodies of the astronauts are themselves described as mines. Small graphics show how to attach your body to the onboard system to fertilize the plants and to produce electricity in a reaction that turns phosphates you excrete into pure P4. To mine the stars, you have to mine your body. To mine the future, you have to mine your brain. The primary motor cortex and the area for visual motor coordination and multimodal association are centered around what used to be known as Brodmann Area 7. It serves as a point of convergence between vision, movement, and proprioception to determine where objects are in relations to part of the body and to anticipate where they will be a second later. It serves as a point of convergence between vision, movement, and proprioception to determine where objects are in relation to parts of the body and to anticipate where they will be a second later. If treated over longer periods of time with regular doses of phosphate, this area of the brain develops arsenals of phosphocreatine, a phosphorylated creatine molecule that provides brain cells with high fluctuating energy demands with short intensive boosts. Déjà vécu, to claim to recollect past experiences that are actually novel. Disordered memory awareness, recollective confabulation in 2 cases of persistent déjà vécu, neuropsychologia neurotica. I watch my brainwaves enter future states on the screen and take posture. It's a bit like method acting, only you don't look for an experience from your past, but one you haven't yet made. If you subtract pattern recognition and the decoding system from your perception apparatus, what remains is the bliss of the real. Noisy, a rush, everything at once. Plug in and drop out of the world. To prepare for the experiment, we would inject ourselves with a subnarcotic dose of an anesthetic, originally developed to be used on animals. Once we did, we understood what an aesthetic is, to exist in a space without images or structures. In anesthetics, all you do is play.
Exactly. So that was like a sum up. It is performed in the International Space University, Strasbourg, and it is taking place, this play, all you do is play. The play with a self-designed experiment that we have developed together, Stefan, Glasauer and me, about a perception moment and a decision problem that we solve with interface, with a game interface. And I wanted to say this habitat where the performance, the duration performance, a simulation for expedition on Mars took place, is set on Earth, on this International Space University Strasbourg, and it is designed by a colleague of mine. She is a space architect, Barbara Imhoff, and she designed this habitat also for the Mars mission. So it really will be used and is tested by the ESA in collaboration with the NASA, tests surrounding, and it is a sustainable habitat. It's called SHE habitat, which means sustainable habitat for extremous environments, SHE. And all the activities, we live, we mine ourselves, we recollect, we process, and we do experiments, and these experiments are also part of an artistic research process because the game itself, the discourse that was a dialogue took place with experiment also where we were tracking the eye movements, and this is part of the artistic research process and program that artifacts contribute to a serious research process also. not only that art takes out mechanisms of the sciences, as opposed to science and art, where we often take methods, elements, put it into the art. It is a multi-layered element, like the image that I was showing here, discussed at Zentrum Fokus Forschung at the University of Applied Arts Vienna, where I'm also professor for the artistic research program, where we have performative practice, installations, and experimental systems to bring together these different formats of discourse, of discursive elements in text, also with the experimental setup, and often also scientific approaches. One more word to the objects, ludic objects, as a play element. The term ludics is also introduced, or ludic, not game, not play, but ludic, because we want to put play, so the process, the processual aspect, in relation to the main element of games, which are constraints. As a game is mainly a space, a time limitation, but also a set of rules. And here we have similarities to what, for example, this is our thesis that we also discuss during the residency that I have at the CAS, at the Center of Advanced Studies, that experimental systems can be compared, most probably, that will be our thesis to be elaborated further, with game systems. And this is a ludic object I also brought here with me. And such a ludic object like this one, I need my glasses, and which is not fully charged, we brought artifacts. It looks like the rotorelief of Duchamp. It is a self-etched circuit board as well, and it also is a performance device. It is a 3G zero sensor. It's like what you have on your iPhone now, but this is already designed 2006. So it's an old artifact of mine that I brought, like space and scientific traces, and this is an artifact trace which is not fully charged. So it should, these are LEDs also that take the movement. This is back to the front and to the fore, and this is the gyro sensor, where we can, if you go on, thanks a lot, where we can navigate through any three-dimensional space, also with an artifact that has a symbolic value, a merit, I would say. Because a circuit board also can look differently. It doesn't have to be green and these corner stuff, and so it can also look like a quote of anemic cinema object that rotates from Marcel Duchamp. There is an important work where Marcel Duchamp did also optical experiments, and he hoped that he could market these also that look quite similar, like this rotorelief. So just a short term to explain what a ludic object, a short-term excursion, a ludic object could be. It can be an artifact, but here we also have something which my colleague Manfred Holler from Munich, who visited us at the CAS this week, already identified as a Mohol notch image. But I don't know if Stefan would agree about this.
It is in fact not. This is, of course, this machine, which you can see down there. We illuminated it also. Unfortunately, it's no longer functional, but it worked as an experimental device for testing our perception of gravity. So what you basically did with this device is you had to look inside this object and then adjust the indicator which is inside so that it looks to you perceptually upright. So what happens when we do a task like that? Basically, this is the task, now with another object which is similar to this one, which you see here in front. And for our perceptual feeling of upright, gravity is the reference. And what you can see here in this image, so this would be the objective vertical, as we call it, the gravity reference. You can see that it's aligned with the wall. And you see also that this is not aligned, apparently, with gravity. But this was exactly what Margarete, when she did this experiment, perceived as vertical. So her subjective feeling of verticality deviates from the objective one.
It is really like that. I didn't really believe it. So it's an exciting moment if you are in front of such an object where you are not really told before by the scientist what it is. Because if he tells me before, or she tells me before, I wouldn't know what's going on. So normally you cannot tell a participant. So then the subjective moment is touching, I have to say, just to tell. It is a discourse. It's announced as talk, that's why we interrupt each other.
So you were kind of puzzled when you discovered that you actually, what you did was something like that, that it's totally tilted, yeah?
Yeah.
So this is a kind of a puzzling moment, actually. And the question is, of course, how do we explain that? What do we do to explain that? And my approach to this is psychophysics, and this is from Gustav Theodor Fechner, from his famous book Elements of Psychophysics. So he says, unter Psychophysik verstehe ich eine exakte Lehre von den Beziehungen zwischen Leib und Seele. Psychophysics is for me an exact science of the relationship between body and soul. At that time, they would say soul, but we would say, okay, between the physical and the psychological. And what he also mentioned is that psychophysics is like physics, is going to use mathematical connections or mathematical relations between what is objective, what we can measure physically, and what we can measure with our perceptual, what is kind of in our perception, the actual representation of something. So in the case of, yeah?
No.
You wanted to?
Just go on. I just said, if you go on to the next, that it was also very inspiring when we had this psychophysics approach, but also this week the talk that ERES here as guest on DRE and DC, subjectivity and objective view. I would call it now view in relation to this scientific work, where we have the self as a reference. And
yeah, this I will come to now. So the explanation we give for this phenomenon that you basically perceive in this situation, the verticality not as something which is aligned with gravity, but as something else, can be explained by the fact that we have two references in this case. On one hand, gravity, and on the other hand, we have ourself as a reference. Ourself is tilted, so lying on the side, so our head basically is in this direction, and when we now make a very simple vector operation of adding these two, then we end up with this subjective vertical, which basically gives us the direction of perceived verticality in this case. So this kind of vectorial simple theory was what Mittelstädt brought up in the 80s. Nowadays we would say the head here, this head reference, is not what Mittelstädt called the idiotropic vector, but it is a probabilistic bias for our upright position. So I think this is also an excellent example of how we change our scientific language. Basically, we have the same theory, we just talk about it in a different language now. Where Mittelstädt talked about vectors, we now talk about vectors as references, we now talk about probability distributions. And my feeling is that we now understand more than we did in the 80s, but maybe this is just a feeling.
But what if we're missing certain references that we have normally? For example, gravity?
That's where we come back now, right? This is now our coming back to the topic here of this exhibition.
Zero gravity.
What happens there?
How does it feel?
Exactly. Does it feel like this? This is something between flying and falling, right? You seem to, on one hand, Yves Klein seems to start to fly into the air. On the other hand, we all know what will happen here inevitably is that he will fall down, of course. Yeah? Falling is the closest we have on Earth to microgravity, to zero G. While we jump from a chair in this short period of time, for us, this is 0G. We have no accelerations acting upon us. We are just in a free fall state. And this is exactly what we do, or what we can do, when we do experiments in 0G, or when we want to experience it. So this is a graph of a 0G parabolic flight. You see the pixelish image of an old KC-135 plane of NASA. And here you see what they do. Basically, they start here in horizontal flight, then they start up, nose up, until the nose is about 45 degrees up. Then everything is shut down, the machines are shut down, and now the airplane kind of falls ballistically along this parabola until it shuts the machines on again. It pulls on here and pulls out of the flight.
And here happens microgravity only in this middle area already.
There you have 20 seconds of microgravity. If you do it with the Russians, it is the Ilyushin, and you have 25 seconds, because it's a larger plane. Yeah? And it's more impressive, I have to admit, because you have like space like here. Yeah?
How did it look?
The KC-135 is smaller, and what you will see in the next image is a ESA Caravelle. You probably recognize this guy here. So and now is microgravity. You can see everybody's flying around. I have to do my experiment. I have to do a writing experiment.
So you are tied to the floor, of course.
Exactly. But you can see I'm also in microgravity, evidently. Yeah.
20
so
seconds.
That's one of the short scenes from my microgravity experience. As I said, this is an ESA flight. This was actually in the Ilyushin. This is the big Ilyushin.
Yes, you said before,
yeah.
So excellent.
And how does it feel? It feels a little bit like the next picture which you found.
Yeah, not found. We also looked at the piece together. Es ist Schweben. Was ist Schweben?
It's like floating. It's
floating.
Really like floating
it's not
or
falling,
flying.
It's floating. And this is a work of Shuli Chang. She's a colleague and an old friend of mine also. We were doing together the first Cyber Feminist International 20 years ago at the Documenta X. There was the first appearance. But what she did now, this is exhibited at the Venice Biennial. And it is from Shuli Chang. It's 3 by 3 by 6 square meters. It shows the size of a prison cell. It is also exhibited in a former prison in Venice. And the character she chose, it's about gender switching and gender being imprisoned because of gender issues, let's say, or because of your personal behavior, of how you feel. These are the reasons here. And the person floating expresses this very well in an installation that is also a very ludic one, I would say, because you have here the face trackers. It's always 6 cameras that are tracking the faces also of the visitors, the participants, and you activate also the image that you see in the installation. This is for me a very crucial point, that it's not interpassive, it is really participative, let's say, that you become part and make an active experience also, like in a game setup. So she definitely has game mechanics that she used in this art piece. Like we also, the Real Player Manifesto, I was publishing also in the Elodamus Journal for Computer Game Culture, but it is a humanities magazine. It's about the social game theories also, not only about mathematical game theories where you see which also give ground, but this give ground to discourse and sciences, but they show that we have practices of play and interaction and participation that help us to make a very personal experience. So the first person view, as it calls in games, is opposed to the God view, where you only have an overview. You see the Earth from outside like an astronaut, so he has a God view, and we have a first person view when we make the experience, mainly because we are active also in our movement, like these objects test and show with us where our self, the body, not only what is the self, also the body, like in Shuli Chang's piece, the body, the physical body is a very main reference in the neurosciences, of course, and here in these conceptual pieces as well, and also here in this moment of the experience that you made in the parabolic flight, I would
now
say.
Now we come back to the zero G.
Is that so? Yeah?
What happens? Gravity is gone. Yeah? There's the head left, of course, because we don't lose our heads in. Some people actually do, yeah? And even it happened to me once when I was floating above my experimental devices like that. I was feeling great, yeah. And then suddenly the countdown comes, and I know, okay, within the next 5 seconds, I have to go down because it's going to be 2G and I'm falling. Yeah? And I was like, oh.
It's not floating. Yeah. So you have the subjective.
I was like reacting like you want to swim, but you can't swim. Yeah, it's in the air. It's free. It's like I had to turn around like a cat maybe or something like that, and kind of to push myself away from a wall, which was fortunately close enough, so I didn't fall on my computer at that time. So the question is, oh, you just did it, okay. So the question is, where will it be, the subjective vertical? Will it stay where it was? You know, will it stay where it was? Oh. Or will it be where the head is? And this is the result from the experiment. So you can see here, during this 20 seconds, we had 0 G. So this is the G level measured in 3 parabolas. And this is what 3 test subjects, or as we call them participants now, reported during this flight. You can see here, for example, this line here stays basically where it is. No change. This person perceived gravity or the upright as being almost where it is, or saying like, okay, there was not much change, I didn't know exactly what it was, something like that. Here is another one. That's like I perceive it actually. Within a few seconds, I perceive myself as being upright. I will show you how this looks like. This is yet another one. These are the strange ones. They perceive themselves as being upright down, really like this, upside down, completely inverted. They have the so-called inversion illusion.
So this is the inner space that we see in this experience. So the graph was showing the inner space. So that's how it looks.
So
and
this is how it looks like in an ESA flight, for example. Yeah, crowded scene. Yeah, you would like on the side look at it like this, and I perceived it like this. Yeah? As if I would be, even though I'm on my side, if I would be suddenly be turned up, right? And the plane, of course, has to turn with me. Yeah. So I perceived the plane as being in this orientation.
So would you say that you tested
kind of
your inner space then? You tested your inner space states then? Because we talk about outer space and inner space.
Well, it's my subjective feeling of where up and down is changed a lot. Yeah? This is
what do others say to that?
Test.
What do the Euromir people say? Because you will have the chance to hear one of the test we call it participants nowadays, sorry. Now the subjective, what do they say? What do you want to say?
This is another, this is
Show it?
We can go on from the Euromir mission. This was another experiment we did. Not, of course, I couldn't fly with them, so astronauts. The task was to point to the ceiling.
Maybe
You can see now, pointing direction is completely off.
Ребятки, за поручень не дергайте, пожалуйста.
Point. So, lass mal bitte noch. And I have to mention that at this point, so if this would happen on a rotating table where you would be turned in the same way, you could remember this direction. So this was what we tested on us. So it's the point is here that you are turned around a direction where usually gravity helps. But now there's only this head reference. And this head reference kind of makes you insensitive even to the turning movement, even though this is still present and you can still perceive it through your vestibular organs. We did another experiment here where people, where our participants, our astronauts had to tell us, or in this case cosmonauts, had to tell us where up is. And one of them sent this message to me: there is no up and down in space. We had a hard time with this test subject because he kind of refused almost to do the experiment in the beginning, because he said, it's totally nonsense. You are asking me where is up and down. There is no up and down. This is a nonsense question. You can't do this experiment. And my point, of course, was, but subjectively, our perception can still give us a direction of up and down, even though physically it's not there. It was very hard. And I think in this case, it was not just because he's a physicist, a studied physicist, and had undergone a lot of training, but it's also because he simply really didn't feel it. There are these indifferent people, like I showed you, these different types of test subjects. And he's probably one of them who simply couldn't tell where up and down is in space.
Yeah. So that was the subjective and the personal, the second order observation, where the self, inside and outside. The research is built on the personal. This is a setup, this is a statement of the artistic research program where I was writing my statement, but the image is also about the experiment, about the inner self and the outer self, which you also can see over there. We were setting up with these artifacts at Ars Electronica 2017 installation, a test situation where you were playing the decision demon that is behind Stefan. And in this demon, you were tested and also having a device where your states of inner self, we were using FNIRS before to record the data of the brain in resting state, and also how does it change when you read yourself. Of course, we don't read yourself, but if you read some activity that is displayed to you and it is told this is your brain activity. I mean, these are hex data that I got to see. It was some zeros and one, but what were we doing then? We were playing this game over here, and some of you, if you like, afterwards, we come to an end anyhow, how this is the decision demon. Decision demon, so not Maxwell's demon. It was played, you can go to the next, at the Opera of Entropy as well, at the Experimentellen Musiktheater Tage Wien 2017 at the opening, where we played a game that we designed, and it was a reference to Stanislav Lem's Pilot Pirks, where he is also having the Raumpatrouille, where he is immediately experiencing void, the empty space, and he gets lost, and he cannot decide, like here, is space expanding or imploding, and this was part of this test setup. Of course, also with eye tracking glass, we have it also here as artifact, so we can see how your decisions are made while, or how your brain works while you are playing it. And so a very, very short clip that we are pretty far away. So you see the eye tracker movement becomes part of the stage setup, of the Bühnenbild, so to say. Also the data is contributing to the audio, not to her singing, unfortunately, but to the audio, the general audio.
Second war lost fear happening when all the level.
Muss man nicht so laut in der Kamera schauen. Kann man den Ton ruhig auch runterdrehen. Also the nice thing is that the individual movement of the pupilla, it is a device developed also by Stefan and colleagues of the LMU Munich. This eye tracker, it's not an industrial standard one, but it will be an industrial boost, I hope, for you colleagues also, but measuring really very exact and interpreting with a specific software also the eye movement during a decision process. And here we come to some bullets and to our last experiment that we would like to show to you also, where we say that the subjectivity, a strategy, the merge of discourse methods and different approaches from different disciplines fall together. Like in the announcement we had a reference to Feierabend, where Paul Feierabend was also referring to artistic styles and sciences. It's a quite old theory. I would say in reference to the contemporary approaches, it gains extremely also in on validity, because this coming together and the development of new cultural techniques following certain styles helps us also to deal with these very epicycles of personal motion, and this is also frame that gives a reference to epicycles of collective motion. It's an image from the antique theories of the heliocentered idea of space.
Of the Earth-centered.
Of the Earth, sorry.
So basically, how do you describe the movements of the planets when you think that Earth is the center of the world? So, and then we had these epicycles, and I think it's a very good kind of picture for this distinction between subjective and objective motion. So if we just see ourselves as subjective center of this whole thing, then we might perceive things very differently.
So that's how the planets were, the movement, by observation, were explained, and it's a very beautiful image also in a way, and a very good solution.
And we did an experiment
on these epicycles of collective motion, a participative experiment in the magic circle of play. So the magic circle, as Jan Heusinger points it out, the magic circle of play is also a symbolic circle for a cultural reference where a certain set of rules is valid. And in each game we also have a magic circle of play. In the church we have it, in the sciences we have it, to make it short towards the end.
So this was at an exchange event of Tate Modern in London this year.
Yes.
And Isabel and Alex are also here, who helped with this experiment. And this is how it looked like. So we had participants sitting on the chairs, blindfolded, and we moved them on this kind of strange trajectories through the room. Yeah, you can see here this kind of dance-like pattern which emerged. Each participant is exactly doing the same, so we could test 5 participants at the same time.
All blindfolded, so
of
they
course.
don't see how they are moved, but they feel the movement.
It takes 55 seconds until it's finished. And afterwards we asked them to report what they actually felt in terms of trajectories through space. So these are the epicycles. This is the reference to the epicycles.
Okay, yep.
One more, and then it's done. Because it's 5 times.
5, not the pentagram with 5 movements, also as basis of a certain choreography. So it was a experiment as dance choreography. And
so the objective motion was basically like this. You started out here, then you were turned around, and the other person started like here, and you always kept the gaze position on this other subject. So that was how the whole movement emerged. From that we can calculate, knowing about previous experiments where we tested that basically a trajectory which you move is perceived as being along the trajectory. So basically when you turn somebody, she is perceiving herself as being moved like this, yeah? Because that's how we are used to move in space. And from that we can calculate how it should be, and it should feel like this trajectory. This should be what people are reporting. And now we can show you what they actually reported. These are all drawn on iPad.
It were over 100, I don't know exactly, maybe, but it were over 150, so really a lot in these 2 days.
So these are just 55 of them.
A selection.
The 55 which you just saw, about 50. Yeah, and you see everybody is perceiving something completely different, basically.
Yeah.
Some of them are really perceiving this kind of five things. Some of them are perceiving something which looks very close to what is actually happening. Yeah? Some of them have something which is more circle-like, and so on and so on. And
I also like the social aspect that we had. So it was a collective piece, a moment of a collective perception, but very individual trajectory that you afterwards were memorizing. So the cognitive moment where you memorize this movement, and this is totally individual. But that is very interesting. It was also a moment of a discourse afterward that was important, that we really afterwards also did like a debriefing of the whole thing.
Which is also, oh, that's what you perceived, and look at my picture, and this was what I did, and so on. So I think this is really something where actually science is or what we do in science at the moment is at its limits. Yeah? I mean, I try to get something out of these pictures. Yeah? I try to really to quantify them, like we do, like crunching them and so on.
But we are rendering
very
together now
limits.
also these images, and we see if we can interpret it maybe from a different point of view.
And I think from your point of view as an artistic researcher, I think it's not necessary to get some numbers out of it. Right? So
no, but I would like to get a sculpture out of it.
Okay. you want to have the sculpture out of it. I know.
But we see what we can do.
We will do the sculpture thing eventually.
I don't know exactly what else do we have now.
This is
just
movie.
one more statement.
Onyx,
if you go up
Swiss
with the sound,
satellite.
this is our final.
2012.
We are pretty good.
The Swiss government sold their satellite
Final
surveillance
statement.
system Onyx and its surrounding satellite field near Sion, Loic, in the center of the Swiss Alps, to the US company Veristar, who resold it later to the German company Signalhorn. Both rent the satellite field to the NSA. Onyx is used to monitor international data transfer using technologies mirroring the indirect reading of activities over time as found in the Bayesian decoder systems. Bayes' rules results in the simplified probabilistic characterization of neural decoding. It is used to interpret functional magnet resonance imaging, now applied to communication technology surveillance. Thought reading via YouTube, 2011. The reconstruction of visual material was successfully undertaken by combining a functional magnet resonance tomography (fMRI) scan of brain activities with a learning AI software model.
So, I'm also teaching in Swiss at the University for Zürcher Hochschule der Künste, and so I visited the Signalhorn area, and this is rented to NSA, and that was the final statement, to connect these outer spaces with our very inner spaces, because our personal communication is also monitored. It's also an inner space, this outer media space that is monitored. So thank you. This is the bye-bye image from the Sputnik device. And Alfred Nordmann also reflected from the University of Darmstadt, a colleague, about the art of experimenting, in short. Thank you very much indeed. That's it.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah.
And of course, you can ask questions and look at our devices and look at the exhibition. And thank
Any
you very
question
much
to
again.
answer or go on with the discussion immediately, maybe? I don't know. Yes.
Yeah.
Please, for Dr. Adler.
If I took you right, your lecture was a combination of art and science, correct? So you did together an experiment where the physics
Yeah. Mhm.
Mhm.
and you arranged the experiment, and what was your role?
I was also in the series of experiments that we did a part of the experimental design, also where I brought in the game design elements of how the experiment is made, built, and also contributing my very personal data in some of the experiments. And yes, also, and transferring this data aesthetically. So like at this opera of entropy, I also did a fabric and a fashion design with the data and using this material. And in the other experiments that we are now developing also, the artistic game design, which is compatible with the science experiments, is a contribution also to this joint experiment. And the experiments that the colleagues are doing now with us are different like what they do normally. They wouldn't set up in such a more natural situation like in the Tate Gallery an experiment. And you all say this is interesting and might contribute also to your data, to a more natural experimental situation.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and I mean, on one hand, it's interesting because of the naturalistic environment, because we go away more and more from this kind of constrained experimentation in laboratory situations, which we know that they might induce biases actually, which are not relevant for daily life. I have one study done which basically shows us that a whole bunch of literature basically studies a laboratory bias since 150 years. So it's really crazy. And so we need to go to more valid ecological situations. On the other hand, we see that experiments like the ones we did with the Mir station, we had 2 cosmonauts. This is almost an artistic research experiment, because you can't say this is just about the experience of 1 or 2 test subjects, participants, no longer about what we do in science when we take the mean of a population and we want to extend basically our findings to the whole, basically to the whole mankind, if we want. Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you for the question, really. Because I know you are very experienced also with the science and art positions, and it is a risky ground for artists to enter here, no? Because really, what is then if I don't have the full control of the situation, and if I really participate directly in the research process, but that's what I really was teased, I really was seduced here to go into that field also, because I was also very interested in what is this weird, strange new field of artistic research that emerges more and more, where we can see, can we really have such a movement together where we have both elements? So yeah, the choreography, the design, the elements, that we had this shape of a symbolic figure like the magic circle, which is a theoretical object, and a ludic discourse object also. These were parts for me, but I don't know if it is really sufficient for the contribution to the development of the arts. I think this is still a process that is ongoing. Yeah.
Now there are 2 questions. Ray, I think you were first. Sorry.
of movement, physical movement within an augmented reality, and maybe also at 0 gravity. You see that you don't have to cannot fix your eyes or something like that.
So in 0 gravity, basically the movement perception, except I think for this turning perception around an axis where your head is really involved, but in this direction, for example, or straight movement is almost the same as on Earth. also for your sensors. So you basically you have your vestibular sensors and your eyes, and you can make everything out of it. Yeah? In augmented reality or virtual reality, specifically, things get a bit strange, because very often things are, so sensory inputs are missing. So, for example, something which I, for example, think is very important is like when you are in such a virtual reality simulator and you go around, you turn around a corner, then this feels strange and you don't know why, because it's turning. I mean, it's turning is like turning. Yeah? Of course, your turning sensory, yeah, the input is missing on one hand, but what's also missing is the accelerations which act upon you. So you are missing the forces. Yeah? And all this makes you feel in a way strange and makes you sick in the end. Yeah? This is one important aspect of the sickness.
Zero gravity, someone was moved by another person. You see, and then
In this case, these astronauts, these cosmonauts don't get sick anymore. So this is something. But speaking of sickness, I know how it feels. So I can tell you it's horrible. Yeah. So don't make parabolic flights without medication. It's not recommended.
Yes, please.
You had a question, yes.
I was interested in the one that was in the Tate drawing where the difference between the subjective and objective shapes that people were following in the chairs. And I was wondering whether any of them involve repetition, and whether or not you think people might have got better. Sorry, I'm trying to word better. Whether their subjective shape would have more accurately matched the objective shape that they were following if it had been repeated over and over.
Yeah.
Not that, of course, I can see the.
They
Without
didn't. We
seeing the
removed.
shape.
Yeah. They didn't see the shape. Then. Also in this one, the first one.
Before and after?
No.
They never saw it.
No. That was
they didn't
only
see.
in the first session or first two sessions, and then just to show the image also for us, and then we removed it.
Right, and then
But that's a good
were there
point.
any repetitions
Yeah.
with any given subject? I was
No.
just wondering whether
No.
they would get more accurate.
I think it could kind of reduce the variability of their own perception, so that, for example, many participants reported that, I remember very well the first one, and then there was a second one, and then I'm not really sure what happened then. Then it got kind of mingled, yeah, and my perception, I don't know where I was, and so on. So it might be that after because it's a relatively complex trajectory. Yeah, so you run into problems also simply with memory capacity, so to say.
I mean, normally you have the experiment Stefan was showing me before. You have a movement from point A to point B, and not such a complex shape as we did. But there was no repetition. Yeah, thank you. We don't know, but most probably, yeah.
This is also
We will
something
see.
which we usually don't in science, right? If we do experiments,
Interesting
we do
point, yeah.
repetitions. We test subjects at least 5 times, yeah, so that we can make a mean and
but
a
then we
standard
must
deviation
change the
and everything.
question. Then it would be more on learning also, not how do we learn also. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know exactly who wants first. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it was very, very interesting.
Thank you.
At least to me. I was so excited when I read the Ludic Erkenntnisobjekte because it linked me actually to a current theoretical discussion in the arts, the object-oriented ontology and the network, the active network
Yes.
theory of
Actor network theory. Yes.
And two questions coming out of that is, do you have a common theoretical ground on how are we discussing the results? That's my first question. And the second one, have you been thinking of that the objects are also acting on you?
Yes. Oh, yes. Jetzt braucht man den Screen mit dem hier. Ja.
Because you're like in a
Das-
traditional
Ja.
discussion.
Haben wir das vom Computerspielemuseum Berlin, wo den Film in der Präsentation mit der Space Invader Konsole ist das noch drauf? Thank you. Also I'm familiar,
Ja, ist drauf.
nicht drauf,
Ja.
auch nicht drinnen
Nein,
in den
nein.
Folien hinten. I can show you afterwards an image also from another performance where, so I start answering from the ending, where I was investigating at the Computerspiele Museum Berlin. It was not with Stefan together, but it was with an emotive device, so a brain measurement device, a commercial one. And we connected it to the Space Invader console from 1971. This is the spacey, glittering green game console. And I was, with a pickup coil, I was not monitoring my brain waves, so to say, but also putting the electromagnetic waves from the machine into this appearance. And it was a performance in a Sauerstoff, in an oxygen tent where I was investigating the machine, the game machine, the object. And also in order to merge with this brainwave setup with the machine that also has waves, electromagnetic being, status, whatever. So yes, this one I really would love to show to you. It's from 2017. It's called Neurospace. So it would be really would have been really a good example. If you have it here, we can show the image. No, not on this machine, but there is also an online clip. So I'm aware of that and very fascinated by we have these objects and what do they mean? Do they have also not an anthropomorphization of the object, but they also are not only tools, not vehicles, and then like in an actor network theory frame, also it really can be discussed where it also, the material has a meaning, the object has a meaning, how it interacts and deals with us. I'm bringing that into discourse. That was the original question. So when we were setting up also together with the two colleagues here, like an abstract, and we had to submit this experiment also, so a little bit in the text, and we exchange elements. I'm familiar with these theories, and I think I also can contribute here to the discourse with the scientists. Yeah. But we didn't do that yet. So the other work I did before, I did with another colleague or myself basically at the Computerspiele Museum Berlin, because they were providing the historic artifacts, which I liked very much. Also, I like to play with historic artifacts like that. But this one was really monitored with a device that was made for the brain and fed back into, I don't know exactly, emerging of that moment. So thanks, that's a very relevant link, I agree. We didn't see it here. Yeah.
You had another question?
Yeah, I had a question. Sorry.
Thank you.
On that experiment where you found there are 3 types of people and they're different how
Yes.
they experience where opens. So is there independent, why are people different that way? Are there, and if you looked at people in this room, could you say these will be the people who will feel inverted, these will be the people who don't feel any difference? So why are there these categories?
We tried to find out at that time. So this was one of the big questions we had at that time. Why do some people react this way and others react the other way? And actually there were some correlations with things we could measure on ground, but it was not like, as far as I remember, it was not one-to-one. So we could not completely predict what would happen. And I still don't know why. It's still kind of mystery. Yeah.
Okay. I say thank you very much. I think we are there. Thank you. Okay. Ja, hast du das nicht in der anderen? In dem Addendum hättest du drin.
Naja, da muss ich jetzt ganz raus und gut, wenn du willst, dann irgendwo ist es schon, wenn du es willst. Das möchtest du noch zeigen, oder was?
Ah ja, that was the image.
So. Nein. Naja, das ist nicht so schlimm. Ja, das wäre gut, weil da hinten sehen Sie bestimmt jetzt besser. Also die Kamera nimmt es wirklich auf, ne? Wenn ich hier zuhalte, dürfte eigentlich